Hello, this is James Couture. This is a video about how to quote. Quotation is when you use another person's words in your own essay, but you don't plagiarize them. You use quotation marks, you cite your sources, and therefore you can use another person's words as evidence or to prove an opinion you actually are making or a point you're trying to make. Alright, so this video will do all of these things. You can pause if you want to see what those things are. So the first thing you're going to do when you're quoting is you want to make sure you can cite your quotations. There's not a lot of point in quoting someone unless you can say where you quoted it from. So if you're doing a formal paper, you're going to want to do this sort of stuff, a full-on works cited page with a proper citation. In this case, in my class we do Chicago style, so here's a Chicago style citation. This would go on the works cited page. You'll also need a footnote or endnote citation. I'm going to show you how to do footnotes because I like them. And so I've made a kind of sub-version. This is proper format for a footnote in Chicago style. It's basically a mini version of what's going to be on the works cited page. So you need to have a citation for your quotes. And then we're probably going to want to know, how do we do a basic quote? So here I'm going to look at a particular website that we're going to be quoting from. This is an article on Boing Boing about one of the episodes in Walking Dead. It's basically a big essay about this Walking Dead episode. That'd be a funny thing to quote. So in order to make this video easy, I've made a version of this web page that's a Word document that makes it a lot easier to cut and paste. So the first sentence I'm going to use in my fake little paper is this one. And there's a grammatical error in this sentence, actually, which is really handy. It doesn't have a period at the end of the sentence. All sentences should end with periods. This one doesn't. That doesn't matter for quoting, but it will allow me to show you something kind of interesting. So if I wanted to quote this sentence, Control Copy to copy it, I just copy the sentence, go back to my fake paper, and I will want to put a quote in. So I always put both my quotation marks at the same time, and then I backspace into the middle of them. That way I don't forget to do both quotation marks. And then you just paste in your quote. The one thing you do need to do when you're quoting, though, is you can't just splat a quote between two quotation marks and call it a quote. That sort of shows your reader that you didn't write that yourself because it's in quotation marks, but doesn't really introduce the quote. It doesn't say who wrote it. It doesn't say what it has to do with anything. So generally, you're going to want to introduce your quotes. So in this case, in the very basic way to quote, I have introduced this one. In his review of the Walking Dead episode, McFarlane said, comma, showing that I'm done with my writing, and then quotation mark, opening the quote, and then putting the quote in. Now this isn't a complete sentence yet because I have a quotation mark, but I haven't ended my sentence with a period or an exclamation point or something. So to end this sentence, I'm going to put a period right here. And this is a little strange because if you remember, there's a typo and this period doesn't actually exist, and obviously it would be a little strange to put a period inside the quotation mark because it seems a little bit like you're lying because that period wasn't there. But grammatically, you do put all your punctuation inside the quotation mark. So in this case, period, then quotation marks. There's one exception with question marks, but don't worry about that. So here is how you end a sentence that is a quote. Period, then quotation marks. And now I need to cite my source, show where I got that quote. And up here I had pre-made my citation, so I'm going to copy that. And then you put your citation in Chicago style right at the end of the sentence after the quotation mark. And you go up to references if you're in Word. And then you do insert footnote. Other word processing programs will have this in different places, but they'll always be either insert footnote or insert endnote or something like that. So I click that, and in Word it opens up this little space at the bottom of the page where I can paste in my citation. So there you can see it has a number 1 in superscript, so kind of raised off the line. I just pasted in my citation, and there you can see it further up on the page where I've actually used the quote in my sentence. So introduction, comma, quotation mark, quote, period, end quotation mark, and then the attribution, that little number 1. The other really basic quote form is to put the quote at the beginning of the sentence, which is a little bit of variation on a theme. So I will take that quote, and this time I will put it at the beginning of the sentence. So here it's quotation mark, there's the quote, and then comma. And again, it does seem a little fake because that comma wasn't really inside the quote, but that's how you do it grammatically correctly. Comma, then quotation mark, then wrote McFarland, period. When you're doing Chicago-style citation here, you need to put the citation at the end of the sentence, not at the end of the quote. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but that's the way you do it. References, footnote, opens the footnote page, and there's a better way to do this, but I'll show you that in a different video. I'm just going to do it really straightforward here. So there it is, a second citation. It's actually the same citation, but whatever. So there's your basic quote, either with the quote at the end of the sentence or the quote at the beginning of the sentence, but the same basic idea. When you're doing quotes, you're going to need some kind of word that's called an attribution word that shows which sort of thing you're doing to introduce the quote. So most students just use wrote or said. Those are the super basic ones. Sometimes I see noted or claimed, but there really are a ton of them. I actually give my students a paper with about 45 or 50 of the very basic ones, but these are just some of the other ones. And they all mean something different, and using different attribution words is handy because it kind of livens up your writing. And some of these things really do mean something significantly different. Remarked is very different from mentioned. One of them is just got a different feel to it. So using multiple attribution words is very handy for livening up your writing. Another thing you may end up having to do or wanting to do is to do what's called a formal quotation introduction. This is where you make a claim about the paper or about some quote, and then you're going to want to include a quote. But this isn't just McFarland said, comma. This is you making some claim as a writer, and then you put a colon, and then you're going to put the quote in. So I'm going to go grab something out of the paper that I want to use, and in this case it will be this. And I will go back to my fake paper, and I'm going to slap that in between these quotes. Ta-da. So in this case, I have made this statement. McFarland was opinionated about which scenes were best in the series, colon, open quotation mark, and then his statement, one of the best scenes, blah, 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 period, end quotation, and then I would put my footnote right here to show where this came from. So this is a different kind of quotation, one where you're not just saying he said it, but you're making a claim using a colon to say basically like, here's my example, and then giving your example. So that's a formal quotation introduction. Another thing you may do is work a quote into a sentence. In this case, you're going to want to start with your words and end with your words, and you're going to want to put the quote right in the middle. So let me give you an example where this makes sense. So we'll find another quote here and copy it. Take it back to the other paper and put it into the quotation marks. So, McFarland describes the politics of the council, comma, the oligarchical leadership group that replaces Rick's dictatorship in peacetime, comma, quotation mark, in his analysis of The Walking Dead. So it makes grammatical sense. It reads like a normal sentence. One of the things you'll notice that's different here is that there's no comma here. It seems like there should be a comma or a colon or something, but because this reads naturally, you don't need the comma or colon. This is just the way it works in a grammatical sentence. This comma is actually related to the other comma in there because this whole phrase is in a positive for the council. It's not something you need to worry about in this video, but basically this comma is here because it's grammatically necessary, not because it sets off the quotation from the later part of this. Once again, you'd end the sentence with a quote with a footnote. So that's how you work a quote into a sentence. You also might want to put your words in the middle of a quotation if you're feeling double extra tricky. And let me show you how to do that. So here's another example down here, which I have pre-cut. And I will copy it, go back to my model essay, and I'm going to put the whole thing at the beginning, and then I'm going to take the second half off, and I'm going to put that in the second half, and you can see how this looks. So let's get rid of that extra space. Open quotation mark, first part of the quote, and then I'm going to need a comma here, because this is like that one where you ended the sentence with comma, quotation mark, explains McFarland, but I'm going to go on. Comma, open quotation mark. You don't need that 6. That was just my cut mark. So, explains McFarland, comma, open quotation mark, more quote, period, quotation mark, and then you would put your notation at the end. So sometimes this is actually useful, but mostly it's just very stylish. So if you want to vary your kinds of sentences, you can do that. This is something you run into bizarrely oftenly, actually. My students always have trouble with it. This is how to quote quotations within quotations. So how do you quote something where the author themselves that you are quoting is quoting something? So in this case, I have this sentence right here. And in this sentence, the author of the piece, McFarland, was quoting Jerry Seinfeld, oddly. And so here you can see his introduction, comma, open quotation marks, the words of Jerry Seinfeld, period, close quotation marks. But let's say I wanted to quote this whole thing, copy it, go back to our model, put it in the quotation marks, and you can see the problem. So here's my normal introduction, comma, open quotation marks, the quote, but then I get to this new quotation mark. So my reader is going to be confused. Is this a new quote by Couture? What's going on here? So the way you make this clear is you change this double quote, watch it happen, to a single quote. And you take the second double quote, the one where inside my double quote, so see how it's double quote, we're going to take that and make it single quote, double quote. So this way a good reader can tell that I wrote that McFarland noted that, comma, and then I start quoting McFarland, comma, then he starts quoting Seinfeld, period, to end the sentence, his end to the Seinfeld quotation, my end to the McFarland quotation. So that is the way you do it. It actually does come up remarkably often. So you basically just change the quoted author's quoting quotation marks to a single quotation mark instead of a double. You put single quotation marks inside double quotation marks. The last thing you're likely to run into as an issue is how to quote very long quotes. So in this case, which you normally don't do because it's kind of bad style, usually you try and keep your quotes as short as you can. Usually students are only quoting really long things when they're trying to make their essays look longer, but there are times when you need to do it. So in this case, I have my paragraph, see it's indented, here's my topic sentence, the paper's going along, and then I want to put in my evidence right here, and then I want to write the rest of my paragraph. So I'm going to go back to my paper and show you my example. That is the really long quote I want to use. It's after this. And I'm just going to quote this whole paragraph by way of example. So grab it and stick it into my paper, and you see the problem. So when the reader's reading, it's going to be very hard for them to tell basically who's writing after a while. Like, I start quoting McFarland, but then by this point the reader's like, wait, is this McFarland talking? Is this Couture talking? So there's a trick, of course, to make it clear. So at the beginning of the quote, the very long quote, you hit return, and then you go to the end of the quote and you hit return again. So you set the long quote apart like that, and then to make it nice and clear what's going on, and this will be obvious as it goes along, you take it and you single space it. Your grader, your teacher, probably won't be grading this because you didn't write it, so you can single space it because they don't need any space to comment. And then what you do is to make it further clear that it's a quote, make it a block line, so take the indentation away because it's not a new paragraph, but then oddly, indent the whole thing a bunch. Like, I always do like 3/4 of an inch. There's probably some official number, but nobody's ever yelled at me about that. And 3/4 of an inch on the other side. So now it's really obviously what McFarland wrote. See, here's the beginning of my paragraph, here's the end of my, or here's the beginning of my quotation, comma, and then here's my quote. In fact, this is so obvious that you don't need these two quotation marks because they're just kind of irrelevant. They're not necessary because clearly this is a quote. And then you would put your footnote right there. One last problem here, though, which is that it seems like my paragraph is now a new paragraph, and I don't want that to be. So what you do here is when you continue on your paragraph after one of these really long quotes, make sure to make that indentation go away. Take your thing back to the margin line. So this way your reader will know, here's the beginning of the paragraph, here's the introduction to the quote, here's the quote, the footnote would be there, and then the paragraph goes on, referring to this quote and then wrapping up the paragraph. So that's how you do a very long quote in proper style. So simple quotes are really done very simply, basically. I'll make this even more simple. You say McFarland said, comma, open quotation, put the quote in, period, close quotation, then your citation. That's all you have to do a basic quote. Hope that was helpful. Thank you.